Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for March 2020. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs, and by sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better DMs or GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/RogueWatson. You don't even have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content. We are glad to have you. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, and Chris, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos Dade, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, A.K., Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Rosh, and Lumpy Spuds. Thank you all very much for your support. This month's topic, as determined by the poll on the Patreon page by a resounding margin this time, is boss battles. Do we use boss encounters in our tabletop RPGs? Does every dungeon need a boss fight at the end? And probably most importantly, how do we balance them? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Marcos.
Hello.
Oh, and Tiny.
Hello.
So boss fights. I'm excited about this as somebody who enjoys dungeons and using bosses and has probably experienced every extreme version of a boss fight, which is ones that go over very well and are very epic and memorable, and then ones that just completely fall flat on their face and are not very memorable at all. Marcos, you are the first one here in the chat, so tell me about your best practices for using boss battles in D&D or other tabletop RPGs.
Firstly, I love boss battles. And my immediate rule of thumb is don't pull punches. Boss battles are different from just regular encounters because they're supposed to be harder. You know, otherwise it'd just be the same thing over and over and over.
Now, when I think of a boss fight, a boss battle or a boss encounter, whatever you want to define it as, I specifically think of as an encounter built around a single, they're not necessarily alone, but there is a one boss creature or figure in that fight who is significantly stronger than the other like creatures of the area, basically. And that could be, sometimes it's like the same kind of creature, but with like maxed hit points, which I'm not too much of a fan of. Like, hey, this is the Bugbear Chieftain. He's just got his max hit points, and that's like the only difference, which just is like the video game equivalent of, you know, it's as a goblin with red skin instead of green skin. Oh, that one must be a stronger, you know, the Dragon Quest thing of
Yeah, exactly. But no, actually, believe it or not, my boss battles, I try not to only use one monster, only because of the way action economy works.
Yes.
If I do use one monster, they're fighting a Tarrasque or something that can hit hard, and by hit hard, like actually do some damage with the actions that it has available to it. Otherwise, action economy will dictate that your party will win. So most times I have the boss with either flunkies, you know, like whatever enemy, say they've been fighting kobolds during the kobold cave. You know, they'd be fighting a fat, you know, kobold sorcerer with other kobolds around him. And then maybe on top of that, there might be like some environmental hazards or traps that they need to watch out for. You know, a boss battle is something that is hard, but something that is also equally rewarding if they defeat it.
Go ahead, Tiny. What do you think about boss battles?
Well, for me, everything leads up to the boss battle. And in that they could be going through a dungeon and fighting monsters here and there. And during that, I'm chipping away at them and I'm making them burn resources. So when they do get to the boss fight, I have them right where I want them, and they are almost like underdogs. And that's kind of where I want them to be every time they fight one of my bosses.
That's another really good point on balance. And I want to get back to what you were saying, Marcos, too, about like minions and stuff. But do you want to balance your boss fights to where it's at the end of the war of attrition known as a dungeon? Or do you want to give your players like a fresh rest or an opportunity to heal up, which is a very video gamey thing. I feel like there's always like a save point, you see like the a chance to rest up and get all your shit back right before this big fight. Do you balance it that way, or do you say this needs to be the big fight? This is your reward for like hanging on to your shit this long, and some of you might be really hurting and now having to go into this final battle. Which do you prefer?
Honestly, I really don't have it set up as like a linear thing. Like I don't have it set up as that the boss is at the end of the dungeon, and once you go through the entire dungeon, your boss is there. I actually run my larger scale boss battles like that based on like a I call it fronts. Essentially, the boss has a timetable on what they want to get accomplished. Say they want to blow up the city. Every day that the players are doing something, I move that table, that front forward or back, depending on what they're doing. So when they eventually do get to the boss, it might be easier because they've, loaded ballista or they've networked with a neighboring town. And it's not only in a set place, the boss is moving around doing their own stuff too. Based on random tables and what they're doing, they might encounter the boss early. Catch the boss off guard and say, "Oh, I wasn't expecting you guys," depending on how smart they're playing, because I play my bosses extremely competent, unless, they need to not be played competent. So it's really based on when, how the players are doing, how smart they're playing, and, all that culminates into when they fight it. It might be early, they might have an advantage, they might not.
Tiny, how do you feel about so you prefer at the end of all the dungeon excursions?
Well, I run a lot of modules in which they are just designed that way. But when I have a boss that, let's just take Glassstaff, for example, from Phandalin. He's a total wuss, and he's just in his room, writing at a desk or whatever when the characters show up, and he just tries to escape. And he's weak, and he just leaves. I wanted to take that guy, and I do this a lot in all my modules, is I'll take the boss and I will juice them somehow. And for him, I just made him like, instead of the hidden, and sorry about spoilers and stuff, you haven't played Phandelver
Spoilers for
100 times already.
Yeah.
But I took him, instead of making the hidden leader, like he was the leader, like just as he was sent to Phandelver to be, and that might confuse some players like who might know something about it, but I'll just make him more strategic. Instead of waiting to the very end to fight, he will try to pick them off at times when they separate. Like if one goes up to their room and the others are down partying, he's gonna, be smart enough to know that he's weak, and he needs to try to pick them off one by one. So in that case, my boss will just try to hit them when they're at their weakest, usually when the group is split.
I think that's what Marcus was talking about too, is using them tactically to harass the players. What happens when you have just like a big, dumb monster that isn't going to be tactically sound enough to actually like hunt the players down, or have like minions they can command or anything like that? Are those the ones we just leave in the dungeon to have the players come in? And
I like a good supporting cast to a boss. For example, if Sunless Citadel, more spoilers here, but there's a boss there, and he doesn't really have a great supporting cast, and so I took the Twig Blights and I juiced them. I made it just a little bit more interesting in that made them so that they're like kind of like vampiric Twig Blights, so that if you go down and you are starting to make death saves, or if you're on the ground at all, they'll like rush up to you to like plant their roots through you and into the ground and try to drink your blood. And now you're taking damage while you're making death saves. So that makes it a whole lot more fun.
That is horrifying.
So basically, I either juice up the boss or I juice up their supporting cast to make it. It's just gotta be exciting, somehow they gotta has to. It just you can't beat the boss and feel like that was a disappointment or that that wasn't close at all. I mean, when
Yeah,
they fight the boss, they barely live through it. That's how I want them to win.
that's been one of the biggest hurdles I feel like that I've gotten through for years of playing D&D is just how weirdly balanced the monsters are, like as written in the monster manual. I think they're okay at like the very low levels of D&D, like maybe levels 1 through 4. The monster CR ratings maybe make sense, but like the second the players start getting into 5th level and 3rd level spell slots and extra attack, they are so much stronger than what the monsters say they should be able to handle in terms of like this monster is, should be able, like, this is built for like a level 5 party for one monster. Like that, in no way does that ever compute. And that
That's
took
right.
and that took me like a year or two of solid playing D&D before I was like, holy crap, like this is just not working out. And every time I look at the numbers and you look at stuff, I'm like, oh, this looks like a really hard fight. And then the players just fucking demolish almost every situation. And that's been, yeah, balancing. I think balancing in general is difficult. And that could probably be a whole, well, balancing encounters was a DM roundtable, wasn't it? I think that was, that might
I
have been
think
our,
it was.
I think it was our
Yeah.
first DM roundtable, but and that,
Yeah, I remember that one.
and that's worse for boss fights because we do want to make boss fights a lot more challenging. And the problem is, as Marcos mentioned, you cannot put a monster, no matter how hard it is, with I guess some extreme exceptions, by itself and expect it to do anything remotely good. And the fact that you have to have monsters so much more stronger than the party to make them really feel like a challenging boss fight. So I'm not sure you can even have a traditional boss battle in D&D like you would a video game, which is, to me, a party of your heroes up against some big giant monster thing that's so crazy powerful and fun to fight. But even and we'll get into this as well. Even with legendary actions and layer actions, I'm still not sure it necessarily works out to where you can just
It
have
makes the playing field even.
yeah.
Legendary actions make the playing field even.
All right, let's talk about
Honestly,
legendary actions. Go ahead.
yeah. No, because honestly, it's a design of just of Dungeons and Dragons Fifth Edition that the characters are just overpowered.
Yeah.
So using the secret system means if you use the secret system as it is, the players will usually blow through anything that you toss at them. And legendary actions and layer actions are kind of to level the playing field. Um, I love them. I love them because it makes that single monster that they're fighting all that more strong. And if it is a boss that has minions, it makes that boss even more strong.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course you can flavor your legendary actions however you want. In the book, it's usually you make an attack, you can cast a spell after this person's turn. Usually, most monsters that have legendary actions have 3, and in tandem, they usually have legendary resistance, which allows them to make any saving throw.
That
Which comes in handy, people have portents because it overrides portents.
That's such a bullshit feature. I do kind of like it for bosses because it makes sense that they would have some kind of extra thing, but that is such a bullshit and no, I'm just going to choose to save.
Yeah. But I mean, if you don't flavor it, it kind of sounds like BS. But that's why I always try to make sure the legendary actions make sense. Like if you're just finding a guy with a sword, his legendary actions, if it's cast a spell, yeah, you could just say, yeah, he throws a fireball at you. But like I would flavor it as, no, he has like a magical barrier around him that reacts to people around him. It scans or whatever when somebody's doing something, it does the best possible thing, which would be throw a fireball. I always try to flavor it to make sure it's different. And not just vanilla legendary actions, I guess is the best way to say it.
No, yeah, I like that. Do you and Tiny, you can chime in with this also. Do you give your bosses legendary actions even if they don't have them as written, just to have that ability for and I think legendary actions, as far as I'm aware, you get to basically use your boss throughout the round. And it's like they have like 3, actions, legendary actions. They refresh, I think, at every turn, every time it comes over to their turn. And then they can just choose to do one at the end of anybody else's turn. So it lets them act more often, which is frankly so good that I think a lot more monsters should have legendary actions built in. In fact, I would love to see a monster manual that had a boss variant of like most of the monsters in that are written, and that would be like the main thing you would start as, is you would give them all probably like 50% more hit points and then give them legendary actions. And I think that's a way you could scale like bosses for every single different kind of creature in the book. I mean, granted, there's some that are already like chieftains and stuff, but that one more than anything would really ratchet up the, oh man, this thing can act a lot more often, which it needs to, because you're always fighting a party full of heroes.
Yeah, I can't speak to it too much. I mean, I've seen DMs use monsters with legendary actions, but I've yet to run one. Not come to think of it. Yeah, but I think, I mean, obviously it's all about action economy, and if you have one boss at the end, it's just they're just most likely not going to do well. You got to add more. Yep.
I like legendary actions. I don't like keeping up with them. In terms of like, okay, have I used like 2 this round before it, to where I almost just have like, all right, if it has legendary actions, I'm just going to do it whenever I feel like it, and then hopefully it'll all balance out in the end. So it's almost a way for me to be like, okay, is this, how rough do I want this fight to go, is probably how many legendary actions I'm going to be doing.
Come to think of it, I have run one creature that had legendary actions. It was an adult white dragon.
Oh shit! There you go.
Yeah, but it got its butt beat. Harshnag was there.
Oh, so, yeah. Good luck trying to balance things whenever you've got powerful NPCs
like that.
A party full of frost giants. Damn it. And layer actions, I think, are similar. Where layer actions, I think, are the ones that happen like every initiative at 20 or something, and it's just like something happens in the environment, which is pretty neat. But yeah, it seems like no matter how strong the creature is, you need minions. Even with layer actions, you might need minions, and we're going to talk about this probably in a future Crafting Annihilation episode, because there are some bosses in the tomb. I don't want to get into them here because I think some of my players listen to these DM roundtable discussions, but some of them I might have to do a balance pass through, because if they, even if they've got some kind of unique environmental hazards or challenges, I still don't like the idea of having any creature, even if it's a boss, be by itself. It's just going to take way too much damage from the players. You need minions. It's just the way that D&D seems balanced, is you have to have some minions in there, even if they're not going to do anything offensively, just to try to absorb the blows or put a kind of a wall up between. And that's why I included in that King of Feathers fight in Tomb of Annihilation. Spoilers, I guess, if you haven't gotten to Omu yet in our Tomb of Annihilation campaign. The players did fight the King of Feathers. That was a really cool boss fight that I'd kind of told them where it was, and it was part of a player's personal quest and everything. And I included some little of the raptors that were not really supposed to be, allies of the King of Feathers, but they sure as hell were in my campaign, because I just needed those minions, and that made a huge difference in that fight, because a lot of the players,
But
just imagine if you didn't have them.
Bosses can accentuate their minions. For instance, if you take a flesh golem, which if you hit a flesh golem with lightning, it heals. So if you take a wizard casting lightning bolts through its flesh golem the party members, it not only hits the party members, but it heals his flesh golem. So you can, if you look at like, the stat blocks, you can really creatively pair up your minions with your boss.
That's a sexy combination. I haven't even thought of that one.
It's great. Yeah.
Actually, a Dungeon of the Mad Mage on the second level, there's a boss fight about that. There's like a floating skull, a flaming skull that's like
Mhm.
electrified instead of fire, and it does have a flesh golem. And like the floor is electrified, so it's like copper panels. And if you just rush it, like
Yes.
you can find the flesh golem on the copper panel. So whenever the flaming skull does like a shocking grasp or a lightning bolt, it electrifies the floor, electrifies everybody for lightning damage, and heals the
Heals the
flesh.
flesh column.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, that's the other thing is, I mean, that's kind of more like environment too. I mean, that can make a great boss battle if you add in some really interesting environmental hazards, traps. I think you guys mentioned this already. But I've had some memorable boss battles that it's the environment that leveled the playing field for the boss. Like the boss was immune to something in the environment.
Give me an
For Storm,
anecdote. Give me a story.
all right. Well, Storm King's Thunder, Deadstone Cleft, the stone giant, can't be turned into stone. So there's Gorgon mud all around, which if the player ends up in Gorgon mud, they have to like roll versus what petrification or something where they get turned to stone. So the stone giant can like dive through it. Like if he needs to get away, he can escape through the Gorgon mud
Nice.
and get through there. And I've seen oh my god, Chris Perkins do this as well. And that's kind of what gave me the idea is that fire giants are immune to fire. Like he had his fire giant just dive straight through the lava.
Yeah. Or just grab
Man.
somebody. I tried to do that. I think with the fire newts. I think somebody tried to
Mhm.
like grab Celeste and jump into the lava or something.
Yeah, and I tried that. There was a moment I tried to do that.
Oh, sorry. Somebody did that to Talus too. I specifically remember watching that
Yes.
when the flame acolyte was like, for Emmix, grabbed Talus and jumped into the freaking lava and took like 6d10 damage or something.
Yeah. Burned every hair on his body or something. Just took so much damage.
Yeah.
Lava's great.
Good time.
Yeah, I mean, hazards and environmental hazards in general, I think, make a lot of encounters just instantly spicier and more interesting. Which I'm excited because there's a lot of good situations for that in the tomb that we're in now. But for a boss battle, that's a good point. Like, and also just for using, as you all mentioned, the built-in like advantages that some creatures might have. Whether that's some kind of like anti-magic or certain kind of resistances. Like you could have like a room full of poisonous gas and a bunch of like zombies rise up because they're just immune to poison. So that kind of situation would be pretty nifty too. What about bosses who are major characters in your storylines? How do you use them? Because I assume at some point they are designed for your players to fight. Can we use them? I think to like a JRPG where like your party has that like bullshit fight in the beginning where they just get their asses kicked by like a boss, and it's like as soon as you try to fight the boss, you're like, oh, I'm supposed to lose this fight. I get it. Fuck you, game.
Yeah.
Which those can be kind of lame, but the main problem is how do you use your bosses, and then do you ever try to get to have your boss escape to fight another day, for example?
Actually, I have a funny story about that. Yes, if for some reason the party does come across that boss, I always do try to have them escape to
That
find another
boss,
day.
capital
But I
T, capital B.
but I specifically remember there was an instance where they were wrecking this guy, and I was like, oh snap, I need to get this guy out of here. So he cast darkness. They were like a church or something. He cast darkness and he smashed the windows out of the church. And then I described it as you see the magician, he waves his hand and the magical darkness billows out of him. You hear a smashing of the stained window behind the pillar. What do you do? And they're like, we don't do anything. We just stand here. I'm like, are you sure you don't want to like run through the darkness and go to the other side to see if you can chase him? The darkness faded, and the guy was just on the floor because he had smashed the window, hoping that they had like gone through. But he was just like on the floor, prone.
Oh no.
And so the darkness faded, and he was like, "Oh, I see you have not fallen for my plan." And they curb stomped him, and he died.
Oh no.
I was upset. But I mean, sometimes
That is a pretty funny story, though.
because the players were smart. I could have Deus Ex Machina and been like, oh, he casts teleportation circle and goes to the moon. Like, I get my rule that I don't fudge things and change things just to match my own story. So I was like, well, I guess you killed him. Hey, congratulations.
I think of Glassstaff specifically, like in his role in Fanlin, and they met him. He was the town master, got rid of the old one, and he was really the town master running, with Red Brands as like the actual legitimate authority of the town. So when they ran into him, they knew right away they didn't like him, and they knew that he was kind of lying about things. But at the same time, it's not like they can just kill him right away. He is like the legitimate authority, supposedly. So there can be social barriers to
you mean your players didn't just automatically kill somebody they didn't like?
No, they didn't. They couldn't. I mean, and if they did in that moment, there would have been repercussions. And I was really trying to play Glassstaff as a boss who was going to be strategic. Like he was going to the townsfolk, he was going to try to give the appearance of following the laws, even though he was harshly enforcing them through his red brands and yeah, like a kingpin. But everybody knows he's crooked. So it's you can try to set up some kind of social barrier where it's like you can't exactly kill this guy outright. I mean, hopefully that's what the players realize.
Hopefully they have moral grounding.
Yeah. I don't know about your group, but players I've played with have not killed him right away. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing to do, I feel like, because especially when you get up to, those later tier 2, tier 3 levels where players have so many ways of just shutting bosses down with all kinds of different spells and abilities. And I do agree that if you're going to put somebody on the field, you should be prepared to lose them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to bullshit anybody away from that. That is why, especially like, again, spoilers for Omu section of our Tomb of Annihilation campaign. I had Zagmira originally appear as a projected image instead of appearing herself during that meeting. Like it could have been a meeting where she met them and talked to them and told them, hey, go, let's work together and do all this. But I was terrified that the players would just fight, kill her, take her cubes, and then I don't have that whole little storyline going on. So because I specifically wanted to avoid a boss fight at that point, so I didn't even have that be an option versus leaving it for the end, I guess.
And they totally would. I mean, you did the right thing. But, as DMs, we get to be creative and we get to work around those things somehow. I mean, I did do the thing. I've done the thing where I've had the boss show up early when they were weak, so that later on, much later on in the campaign, they had some hatred, personal hatred for this boss.
Okay.
But you've also done something, I think, like in with the Sohn sisters and taunting them through dreams, which I think is really cool idea too. So there's other ways the bosses can show up. You just gotta be creative about it. I think another cool way to do it would be if you ever read through the magic jar spell. It's really cool. It's like you're you take possession of somebody's body, you know.
Yeah.
So you can't kill. You don't want to kill a friend if somebody's like taking possession of your friend's body. That's one way to do it, maybe somehow. But yeah, there's ways to work around it.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Again, spoilers for later Tomb, but the Stone Sisters are in the book a very, very, very late game boss battle. Basically, like a boss before a boss kind of a thing. In fact, there's like a triple boss thing going on at the very end of Tomb. But it was written as an encounter in the book that the Stone Sisters can harass the players via like one random encounter or something via the dreams, like their nightmare haunting. And I ran with that and was like, oh man, yeah, I can use these Stone Sisters just to harass them, because in a lot of the D&D published adventures, they don't have, I think I even ranted about this on Crafting Annihilation one time, they don't have a whole lot of good bosses. And, it's just kind of all about the heroes, and that's, the only POV you get, and that's fine and all, but man, so many like shows and stories and things really need you to have good antagonists, or at least interesting ones, ones that you love to hate or whatever else. But there's just not, like, Prince of the Apocalypse doesn't really have good bosses as written. They're definitely the ones that are just kind of twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the players to come and attack them. Yeah, they send out minions and attack the towns and things with their nuclear weapons, basically. But the bosses themselves are literally just kind of sitting there in their dungeons. And I should have done what Marcos was talking about, which is use them more tactically. I think I try to do that a little bit towards the end of Princes, where I was like, oh, I'm going to have at least like one of these, what are they called? The prophets, I think, like appear to them in in an image or a dream or something, at least taunt them, so the players know like even who the hell like these leaders of the elemental cults are, because otherwise they don't really have much to do with the story. And that was kind of why I wanted to use the Stone Sisters more often, is because I wanted to put a face to the whole death curse thing. Otherwise, you hear about Acerak and all that, but he doesn't show up until the fucking very, 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 very end of that campaign.
Actually, kind of what I was talking about doing the fronts. Usually, what I end up doing, because I really only have done it once, but kind of like I use the Steel Predator as like an extension of the Stone Sisters to put pressure on the party. I've kind of done that too in like a reverse, where like the main bad guy to them was like a lawful good paladin, who was just like tracking them over. It's in like the Steel Predator, they only ran into him like twice, maybe 3 times.
Yeah.
But this paladin was like infused with like holy might to smite these adventurers.
Wow.
So yeah, so like every time, like I was like, what are you doing? Are you doing anything to hide your identities? Are you sneaking?
Oh,
like,
nice.
are you into murdering random people? Like, what are you doing? Because you as characters know that this guy chopped your buddy Bob in half. He chopped him in half and smite his soul, and now his soul resides in the gauntlet of power. Your souls are going to be there too, unless you're trying to do something about this. And depending on what they would do, I'd move that front closer and closer until boom, one night, they're sleeping, long resting, and all of a sudden he knocks over their chamber pot and is like, oh, I'm here.
It follows.
Yeah, and they're like, oh shit, me, I'm gonna long rest it. So they got to run away. And
now, how strong is this character relative or enemy relative to the party at this point?
I think we talked before about we like tailor our encounters, and this was a guy that I was like specifically tailoring to them.
Okay.
Because the way I saw it was that he was praying to his God for guidance, and the God of good was like, yes, my disciple. They have a potion of healing. They also have a wand of magic missile.
Oh shit! You got the intel.
So thematically, that's what was happening. But like in game, I was like, okay, if this guy is level 9, they're all level 5. He'd be a decent fight for them. Or if he's level 12 and they're level 5, he'd be a decent fight. Kind of leveling them up.
Okay.
As they make sure that he wasn't too much. That he wouldn't just TPK unless they were doing something that would make him stronger. Or depending on how they were moving their fronts, they couldn't find him. His scrying and his mind magic wasn't able to find the characters depending on what they were doing. Again, I try to run games where the characters are much more like they're more cognizant of what they're doing because their actions have consequences. So yeah, like sometimes for boss battles, that's what I do. It's like, hey, guy's coming after you. The guy you're trying to kill, he's coming after you. It's not the other way around. He ain't waiting on you.
That's cool. I like that a lot. Yeah, the whole hunting the player, and that definitely what I want to do with the Steel Predator too was put some more pressure on them in the jungle and kind of create like that Terminator aspect of like there is something hunting you in the jungle.
Yeah,
It's a hell of a lot stronger.
Mm. That another good point you just made there is, I mean, you said tailor your boss to your players, and I think that's something, Eric, you've done pretty well in that you actually tied a boss to your player's backstory, and that's not something I often do. But that's a really cool thing because it's not just a boss at the end of the dungeon; it's personal, and I always think that that almost makes the combat more meaningful when they
Yeah.
finally get to it.
Yeah, that's one way if you because it's so hard to do the reoccurring enemy thing in general because it's very easy for players to kill anything. But if you can the first time they meet something in the game, if they already have that baggage, then a lot of that work's already done for you, which is a huge advantage to that. I think we could probably do a separate DM roundtable on using on maybe using players' backstories, integrating them into the game, because I do feel like that's worked out really well in Tomb of Annihilation, something I didn't necessarily do very well, or maybe had just started doing in Princes. Certainly didn't do it at all in Phandelver because we had just started. And I really specifically set out to do that with Tomb, read through the entire book before I started and then said, okay, here's how, this Red Wizard at the very end of Omu is going to be tied into Galessa's backstory. Now, you're not going to get to Omu for a while.
Right.
But other players will have their, chances to progress their personal quests quite a bit. And I really treated it like a BioWare video game or something where just every party member, they're all interested in completing the main quest. But in addition to that, they all have their own personal story arcs that are going on. And all those story arcs can have their own, NPCs. I mean, technically the King of Feathers was like a boss for George for his personal quest. And then you could almost consider Tinder, the Red Dragon, which was not a boss fight that went terribly well, the boss fight of Theron's personal quest.
Right.
I don't know, that dragon just, I guess I didn't play the dragon. A lot of this, one of my biggest weaknesses as a DM is I'm not good at actually running combat from a DM point of view. I think maybe I care about my players too much, but I also don't. I probably need to do a better job of thinking more tactically and outside the box with a lot of creatures in terms of what they could do and their capabilities. And yeah, they kind of kicked that dragon's ass.
Yeah. Well,
then again, you have somebody like like who might threaten to have you sleep on the couch if you go too hard. You kind of have a little bit of
yeah, it could be a part of it.
That's a tough one, and I know we covered it on killing players and stuff.
Yeah.
But one thing I have written down here that I haven't even mentioned yet is don't pull punches, fight to win.
Yeah.
And that one is, I think, at least when you get to the very end of Tomb of Annihilation, man, just go for it. You know, I mean, you got nothing left, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The campaign book, they've completed their backstories and all that. Just go for it.
A good example of that is I played Dragon Age Origins, the first Dragon Age. I played through it twice from start to finish, which I don't usually do in RPGs, and I don't even know if I have the time to do that nowadays. But the first time I played it, slight spoilers, well, I guess major spoilers for Dragon Age Origins, but I made like the demon baby with the sorceress woman. I forgot everybody's name now. Which is a path you can totally take. And you can trap like the demon soul of the dead god. I don't know how that game works. The second time I played through it, I was playing more of a lawful goody two-shoes character, and I chose the path to sacrifice myself at the end. And it was no less satisfying. I think it might have even been more satisfying because they did a really good job at the game with the end. All the characters, it's the classic Tom Sawyer, like you get to see your own funeral kind of a thing where all the characters just are teary-eyed and saying what an awesome person you were for, giving up everything to win the day and all that. It was actually a pretty cool ending. So that would obviously be the ideal way to kill players, is that the literally climax of the entire campaign would be a lot more satisfying than, say, somebody just pressed the wrong button and then exploded into shards of nothingness. That one still wigs me out, but
and that could still happen in the Tomb of Annihilation.
It sure can. It sure can. Yeah, there are a few areas that I might adjust because I personally feel like they're just so stupidly shitty, but yeah, for the most part, I think it does a pretty good job with the consequences. And yeah, I don't want to go too far into player death specifically, but you're right. Boss battles, I think, should be played to the utmost. I still, at least with some situations, I do try to play the monster to their intelligence level. And I feel like a lot of time, which I definitely should play a dragon better, but like when I have like a froghemoth or somebody who's just basically a dinosaur, things that aren't necessarily, they're more beasts than they are, intelligent creatures, or the Hydra battle, for example, in the Fane. Those creatures aren't necessarily playing like they're super genius tacticians. But on the other hand, if I want it to be a big boss battle, I probably could have them treat the fight as super genius tacticians if I wanted them to. But I don't know. What do you think has been the best boss fight in Tomb so far in terms of just the most satisfying? In fact, I think this was an actual poll that I ran for our 2,000 subscriber episode. And I think I remember what the winner was, but it was actually pretty split. Everybody kind of voted for different things. We had the Tinder Red Dragon fight. We had the Froghemoth, the shrine at the Omu Shrine. We had the King of Feathers. We had the Steel Predator. And I think the other one I put on the poll was the Zombie T-Rex / White in the Camp Vengeance scenario.
I would have to say none of those. This last one we did, you did with their fight against Sagmira, and then the demon came out, because for me, now I think of it, just watching your players, like they had a look of fear in their eyes, and I enjoyed seeing that. My number two would definitely be Gilead, thinking she could fly and trying to leap over the pond of the Froghemoth. Oh my goodness, that was pretty funny.
That was a great way to start that fight, because I was initially thinking, man, how are they gonna, this is gonna be a really lame way to start the fight if they all just skirt around and somebody uses Mage Hand to search around for the key, or they just open the door to the key and then even fight this battle. And yeah, that.
And you can have, like, sometimes we talked about environmental factors playing into a boss battle, but you can, before, like, planning out your dungeon before they get into that boss fight, maybe give them some kind of temporary madness in the dungeon or something to give them a debuff somehow, and I really appreciated how she just straight up role played that out. It was great. It was fun.
Yeah, that did actually work out pretty well. That was fun.
And I do have to say that my favorite boss was the King of Feathers.
Nice. Yeah, that one is an example of a boss that I looked at and said, this is not nearly strong enough for the boss that it needs to be. I forgot all the specific. Yeah, I'd have to look back at that episode of Crafting Annihilation, but I think I gave it legendary actions and maybe upped either hit points or armor class or something. I think I tweaked a few stats. It wasn't a lot. And then the main thing I added, it wasn't even there to begin with. I had it appear in the middle of a fight that was already ongoing, which is a really cool way for a boss to appear is just fucking teleport in the middle of the players when they're already engaged in ongoing fights and give it some surprise round deliciousness. Totally recommend that. And then obviously with a bunch of minions. Yeah, that was enjoyable. And we're going to have several boss fights coming up, and I'll be looking at making basically similar style adjustments because I don't like any powerful creature to be by itself and not to have any kind of legendary actions or layer actions to go with it.
But I mean, an Atropole, man, that ain't no joke. That's like some high level stuff.
Yeah, we'll be. The spoilers throughout. Spoilers throughout.
No spoilers.
Oh wait, I mean,
yeah, we're gonna have some really interesting crafting annihilation discussions. I'll say that. Basically, and if you've noticed, my episodes of crafting annihilation and anybody watching this have gotten steadily longer as the campaign has gotten further along, and I fear that my once like nice crisp hour is going into like straight up 90 minutes, and is probably going to continue to do that because the tomb, there's so much to cover, and it's almost overwhelming with having to plan just everything at once with the way that Dungeon's designed, and there's a lot of things to adjust and look over and keep track of in a really fun way. I'm really excited about it. I'm a total Dungeon fan. I love Dungeons. And hopefully I can do the bosses that are in there justice. And yeah, the final actual epic climax. And I did like our epic climax to Prince of the Apocalypse. As weird as the win condition is for that campaign, which is not to spoilers, I guess. Man, a lot of spoilers in this one. Which is not to actually.
Go on, please don't, man. I want no spoilers, man. What you doing? I haven't seen
it. You don't actually have to defeat the final like cool ass giant elemental monster beast. You just have to close the portal, basically, which is not that hard to do. But the environment of having the lava everywhere. And these other creatures like a fucking red dragon flying around and the prophet like with the summoning across the law and all this stuff, it makes for a really, really epic set piece. And that's what I really look for with these big, kind of what we're talking about using, having the environment. I think that is what really puts a boss fight together, is having these really cool set pieces of just some kind of environmental hazard that makes everything a little more challenging and interesting. All right. How about our final thoughts about using boss battles in D&D? Tiny, let's start with you and we'll go in reverse.
Okay. I would say, like, I've written down like 8 things here, but I would say the most important thing is make it memorable. Like, if you finish and your players are talking about it, if they can reminisce about it, and laugh about it, then you've done a great job as a DM. Practically though, you got to pay attention to action economy, and probably give your boss some minions or some little trick so that they actually make it a good fight, or wear down your players before they get to that boss, and make them expend resources. And if it's also a weaker boss, then have the boss take the fight to them and hit them when they least expect it, so they're kind of caught flat-footed. And throw in environmental hazards, tie it to the character's backstory to make it personal, basically tailoring the boss to them. Yeah,
you covered all of the things.
I covered everything. You can just hang up now, Subi.
Yeah, good luck following that, Marcos.
Well, you see, if you look at the dichotomy between boss battle and random and no, I mean, yeah, Tiny summed it up pretty good. Boss battles are a must in D&D. D&D is all about feeling powerful and being a superhero in a fantasy setting.
Mm-hmm.
So part of that is defeating bad. You curb stomp the little kobolds, you curb stomp the goblins, but sometimes you need to really test your mettle. You need to chomp your teeth at those big, beefy, strong boss battles that you need. And because of that, you want to soup them up. You want to make sure, like Tony said, it's memorable. Otherwise, the people that are standing there around looking at your wizard that got a bloody nose that's been curb stomping to say this. Oh, okay, that was easy. You don't want that. You want them to be talking about it for months at a time. That, oh man, remember when the trash threw you in the air and then you flew into the plane of astral sea, and you want that. That's good.
For sure. Yeah, that's I think boss fight I agree. Boss battles are extremely important, especially D&D is even if we don't say that it's a combat heavy game, although I would argue it is, it's at least, a third of the game. And boss battles can represent the big climax of a lot of situations and encounters. I know I personally need to be better at running boss battles, and it doesn't help that I feel the overall balance of the monster manual is crap. So that makes boss battles even harder for a DM, and especially newer DMs to even gauge, because obviously that thing, stuff like to like a level 1 party, for example, any kind of boss is just going to be just game over. But once you start leveling up at all, you have to make those bosses so much stronger than, like, way stronger than you think if you want them to hang around, and you have to add minions and probably give them some extra legendary actions or layer actions or whatever else to make it as memorable as it needs to be, because boss fights are awesome. All right, thank you so much to Marcos and Tiny for joining me for this month's DM Roundtable. I am Eric, and I hope to see you all again for next month's DM Roundtable discussion.
Goodbye.
Bye.